Hey guys, tonight we're going to lie back under a tree, close enough to see the stars, and gently fall into the mind of a man who might have understood time better than anyone, while also being completely terrified of it. You've heard the story about the apple, the gravity, the genius, but tonight we're not here for the simplified textbook version. We're stepping into the strange, silent spaces between Newton's thoughts. Fun fact, Newton discovered a lot under trees. You're just here to nap under one. Before we begin tonight's journey of discovery, I just have a small favor to ask. If you're enjoying this peaceful little corner of science, feel free to hit the like button or subscribe so you won't miss any of our upcoming nighttime explorations. It really helps this small channel grow, and it means a lot to me. If you're still awake enough to type a few words, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it where you are right now? There's something so lovely about seeing science quietly stretch across time zones, shared together in stillness. I truly hope this story is gentle enough to help you drift off to sleep. But there's always a small risk. It might be too interesting, and if you do stay awake through the whole thing, at least you'll walk away with a bit of new knowledge. And honestly, that's not a bad reason to lose a little sleep. Now, take a deep breath in and slowly exhale. Let's begin. You're lying in a grassy orchard in early spring. The air is cool, and there's a soft hum of insects waking up. Above you, the sky is smeared with cloud paint, grays and golds, and a little leftover blue from the day. The branches above you creak gently, not from wind, but from time itself, which seems to move differently here. Somewhere nearby, an apple lets go and falls, quietly, almost respectfully. You imagine that. Centuries ago, a young man named Isaac may have been sitting just like this, lost in his own thoughts. Of course, history often polishes stories into neat little coins, shiny and pocket-sized. But real minds, especially Newton's, are anything but neat. They're vast and a bit cluttered, full of equations, prayers, nightmares, and apples. He didn't just want to know why apples fall. He wanted to know why everything moves the way it does, why the moon doesn't crash into the earth, why tides rise and fall, why planets circle stars without flying off into the dark. He didn't just want to explain motion. He wanted to understand the grand pattern behind it, the rules that even the heavens had to obey. And beneath all that, a quiet, pulsing question. What happens when time runs out? You stretch your arms behind your head and think about that, not in a panic-stricken way, just as a gentle puzzle. What would it mean for time to end? And why would someone so focused on logic and mathematics ever worry about something that sounds like the stuff of bedtime stories or doomsday prophecies? You shift your weight slightly, and a tiny seed pod sticks to your sleeve. It reminds you that the world keeps ticking, seed to tree, tree to fruit, fruit to ground. Newton saw this too, but he didn't just see growth. He saw decay. He saw change. He saw that everything in the universe moves, but that movement might be heading toward a kind of stillness, a final cosmic pause. He was born during a time of plague and uncertainty, a moment when death was as common as rain. That might have shaped how he saw the universe, not just as a machine, but as a fragile one. He believed God had created it perfectly, but that its perfection came with a built-in end date, a ticking clock, wound once and left to unwind. And so, even as he became the man who gave the world the laws of motion, gravity and optics, he was also scribbling strange symbols in the margins of his notebooks. He was calculating when the world might end. He was obsessing over ancient texts. He wasn't just a scientist, he was a mystic, a theologian, an alchemist in a powdered wig. A breeze brushes across your face. The stars are out now, blinking like distant timers. You wonder if Newton ever lay under this same stretch of sky, wondering what ticked behind it all. His most famous book, the Principia Mathematica, was a kind of cosmic rule book. It explained how forces worked, how motion worked, but not why, and certainly not what lay beyond. Newton believed time was absolute, flowing forward like a perfect river, unaffected by perspective. It was the stage on which everything danced, but even he sensed that it couldn't go on forever. Somewhere, somehow, the curtain had to fall. You sit with that thought, not in fear, but in quiet awe, because time ending isn't necessarily about explosions or chaos. For Newton, it might have looked like a slow fading, a cooling, a day when all the forces balance out, when nothing pushes, nothing pulls, when the clock finally ticks its last. The apple didn't just fall, it reminded him that things move downward, toward some destination. He wondered if the whole universe was falling too, just more slowly, just more quietly. And you, lying in that same hush, begin to sense what he might have felt. Not panic, not even dread, just a question that won't let go. What is time doing when we're not watching it? Some scientists still debate whether Newton's idea of absolute time was right. Einstein would later say it wasn't. That time bends, stretches, dances with light and speed. But Newton didn't have relativity. He had silence. He had shadows on stone. He had the pulse of a pendulum and the fall of an apple. And from those things, he built the idea that time was a divine whisper, steady, unchanging, inevitable. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, not yet, but to listen. And if you're very still, you can almost hear it, a soft ticking, like a clock hidden deep inside the universe. Or maybe inside you. You open your eyes again, not because anything startled you, but because something soft inside you is curious. It's as if time itself just nudged your shoulder, gently, politely, and asked you to keep listening. The orchard around you hasn't changed. The branches still sway with almost nothing. The stars blink like they've been doing it for centuries. But now, you're aware of something different. You're not just lying under a tree. You're lying beneath the weight of a question that shaped everything Newton touched. To understand it, you have to think about clocks. Not the glowing kind on your nightstand, but the mechanical marvels of the 1600s. Wheels, gears, springs, all ticking with the certainty of a heartbeat. In Newton's time, clocks were more than tools. They were symbols. A good clock didn't just tell time, it created trust. You could divide your day by it, navigate the seas with it, predict eclipses and plant your crops. A bad clock, that was just chaos disguised as machinery. You close your eyes again, imagining the clack of iron teeth turning, the tiny hammer striking the bell. These clocks didn't run on electricity. They ran on patience, gravity, and craftsmanship. And they were changing the way people thought about everything. Before the age of precise clocks, time was a local event. Noon was when the sun stood highest above your town. Night began when it got dark where you lived. The moon rose on your horizon, not on a screen showing a satellite feed, but as clocks became more accurate and more widespread, time began to stretch out, like a grid being draped over the world. It wasn't just your time anymore. It was the time. And Newton, he loved that idea. He saw the universe as a vast mechanism, not unlike a giant clock. If God had built it, Newton reasoned, then it must be precise, predictable, ordered. Every planet, every star, every falling apple was a gear in a divine machine, turning in perfect rhythm. And just like a clock, it needed time to run, not just any time, but absolute time. The kind that doesn't wobble, doesn't depend on where you stand, or how fast you're moving, or what you had for breakfast. Just time, pure and uninterrupted. You breathe slowly, picturing the cosmos as Newton saw it, infinite, elegant, and humming with invisible precision. He called this absolute time, and in his view, it flowed evenly and eternally, like a divine river that never floods, never dries up. It was the backdrop against which all things moved. It didn't care if you were watching. It simply was. But that raises a strange question. If time is always moving forward, smooth and unchanging, how do we even know it's passing? You sit with that thought for a while. Maybe it's the motion of the gears, the swing of the pendulum, the rhythm of your own breath. Or maybe it's the memories stacking up behind you. One apple falls, another is still on the branch. You feel the difference. That's time. Newton believed that even if the entire universe suddenly stopped, if the sun froze, the planets halted, and not a single grain of dust moved, time would still go on. It would still be ticking silently in the background, indifferent to the silence. That's the power of absolute time. It doesn't care if there's motion. It doesn't care if you're asleep. It just ticks. Scientists still debate whether time works that way. Today, we understand that time might be more slippery than Newton imagined. Einstein would later argue that time isn't separate from space at all, but part of a woven fabric, stretching and curving with gravity. But Newton's vision came first, and for centuries, it held the universe together. You reach out and press your hand into the soft grass beside you, just to remind yourself that you're part of this clock too. Not a gear, exactly, but maybe a second hand, always moving, even if just barely, always marking something. Newton's obsession with time didn't stop at the heavens. He believed time also moved through human lives, shaping history, scripture, destiny. To him, the Bible was not just spiritual guidance, it was a coded timeline. Hidden within the verses, he thought, were clues to the beginning of time and its end. But we're not quite there yet. For now, you lie with the image of a universe that ticks, not chaotically, not randomly, but faithfully. Every motion, from the crash of a comet to the rustle of your sleeve, is part of the same choreography. And the music, it's time. You wonder what it must have felt like to believe that everything was knowable, that, with enough patience and math and maybe a few sleepless nights, you could write the rules of the entire universe. Newton believed it. He did more than believe it. He wrote them down. He turned falling apples into principles and spinning planets into predictions. He made time seem tame, and yet, the more he understood it, the more haunted he seemed to be. Because if the universe really is a clock, then clocks need winding. They need maintenance. They run down. And that thought might have been the one he couldn't shake. But we're still ticking, still here, still lying under the same sky, listening to the slow rhythm of stars we barely notice, the mechanical hum of a cosmos that may or may not notice us back. Time, Newton thought, is the language of the universe, not spoken, not sung, but kept. And you're just one of its quiet listeners. You breathe again, a little deeper this time. There's comfort in being small, in being temporary, in knowing that you're part of a pattern that began long before you and will continue long after. Maybe that's all Newton wanted, to find the pattern, to feel the tick, to know that time wouldn't forget him, even if the world did. You turn your head slightly and feel the grass cool beneath your cheek. Nothing has changed, and everything has. Your cheek presses into the earth just a little deeper, as if the grass might help ground you in this strange, quiet truth. The universe ticks, and you're ticking with it. Maybe not loudly, maybe not urgently, but constantly, and somewhere. Centuries before you were born, a young Isaac Newton sat in a similarly quiet place, utterly consumed by the rhythm of that ticking, and by what might happen when it stopped. But you're not quite there yet, not at the end, not even close. Right now, you're sitting on the edge of something else entirely. Newton's private thoughts, the ones he didn't put in the Principia, the ones that weren't polished and presented to the Royal Society. These thoughts lived in notebooks and scrap pages and late-night letters, where physics blurred into prophecy, and where the ticking of time sounded less like science and more like a countdown. You wouldn't know it from his public image, powdered wig, stiff posture, cold genius. But Newton wasn't just doing math. He was deciphering, translating what he believed were divine hints hidden in the world around him. To understand the universe, Newton believed you had to understand its origin. And to understand its origin, you had to reckon with its end. You sit with that for a moment. That's a heavy thing for one person to carry. Even heavier when you consider that Newton was doing this largely alone. He was a professor, yes, a revered intellect. But privately, he had few close relationships. He didn't marry. He quarreled with colleagues, and many of his deepest ideas, the ones about the apocalypse and God's timetable, he kept to himself. It's strange, isn't it, to imagine the same man who gave us the law of universal gravitation, also poring over biblical passages at candlelight, searching for the exact year the world would end. But he did. In fact, he calculated it. Multiple times, using different systems. Sometimes it was 2060, sometimes it was sooner. He read the book of Daniel, the book of Revelation. He treated prophecy the way he treated motion, like a code waiting to be solved. You glance up at the stars and try to picture it. Newton hunched over his desk, surrounded by ink and parchment, whispering equations while tracing timelines between ancient kingdoms and astronomical signs. Not out of fear, but out of deep, desperate curiosity. The same curiosity that made him ask why apples fall also made him ask when history would collapse. And this wasn't some passing obsession. It was a lifelong one. You might wonder, why keep it hidden? Why not share it like he did his scientific work? The answer is quiet but telling. Newton lived in a time when religion and science walked a thin, uneasy line. Publishing theological theories about the end times could destroy a reputation. And Newton, cautious as he was curious, kept most of his apocalyptic calculations buried in private notes. He didn't want the world to mistake his mystical side for madness. He needed to protect the math and himself. Still, it was always there. This hum beneath the formulas, this ache to understand the total shape of time, not just its motion, but its meaning. He didn't believe time was just something to measure. He believed it had a destination, and that destination, in his mind, wasn't random. He believed the universe had a timeline, designed and set in motion by God, a divine story arc with a beginning, middle, and an end. Everything from the rise and fall of empires to the orbits of planets was part of this great unfolding. To Newton, history itself was a kind of cosmic gear, large, slow, and predictable if you knew how to read it. Some scientists still debate whether Newton's obsession with the end of time was a brilliant theological insight or just a product of his loneliness. But either way, the question he asks still lingers. If time has a beginning, does it also have a limit? You look down at your hand resting in the grass, and for a moment, the space between your fingers feels like the space between stars, narrow but vast. You imagine time not as a river now, but as a string stretched tight between two invisible points. A line you're quietly traveling along, a path with an arrival. Newton thought that path was mapped, that it had markers, that the ancient texts and celestial movements were clues, not vague symbols, but literal mathematics of destiny. And so, while the world celebrated his physics, Newton stayed up late, quietly calculating the future. He wasn't predicting the end like a modern doomsayer. There were no megaphones or flashing signs, no street corners, no fire and brimstone sermons. Just parchment, ink, and silence. Newton's end of time wasn't about panic. It was about precision. And you, lying under this orchard sky, feel something subtle shift in your understanding. It's not that Newton feared the end. It's that he couldn't stop himself from trying to know it, to place it on a chart, to pin it like a star. You breathe slowly, letting that settle in. The man who changed the world by explaining how things move also wanted to know when it would all stop. But maybe the most fascinating thing, he didn't think that end would be violent. He imagined a transition, a shift, a moment when history reached its conclusion and something else, something eternal, took over. For Newton, the end of time wasn't destruction. It was fulfillment. You feel strangely comforted by that, not because you believe it necessarily, but because there's peace in the thought that even endings can be orderly, that even the universe, with all its chaos, might be moving towards something gentle. The grass beneath you is cool again, the stars are steady, and the question lingers in the back of your mind, soft and insistent. What if time really does have an ending point? And what if someone already found it? You don't need the answer tonight, just the wonder. The orchard is quiet, but your thoughts aren't. They hum with that last question. What if someone already found the end of time? It's not a fearsome thought. Surprisingly, it's more like staring at the final page of a long book and wondering what the author has planned for the very last sentence. Newton believed that sentence was already written, that history was not only measurable but meaningful. And you, stretched beneath the sky he studied so carefully, start to wonder if maybe time really is hiding something. But Newton didn't look for meaning in chaos. He looked for it in the strange, precise craft of alchemy. Yes, alchemy. The one with gold and potions and vaguely suspicious glass bottles. You've probably heard the jokes. Old men trying to turn lead into treasure, wearing robes and muttering in candlelit basements. But alchemy, in Newton's hands, was something entirely different. Not magical, not ridiculous. It was serious. It was sacred. He believed the physical world contained divine truths, and if you could purify matter, you might also purify knowledge. It wasn't a hobby, it was a second life. Most people think of Newton as the math guy, the falling apple guy, the gravity guy. But for most of his adult life, he poured more time into alchemy than into physics. He wrote hundreds of thousands of words on the subject. He copied ancient manuscripts by hand. He filled pages with strange symbols and elusive recipes, not because he wanted to be rich, but because he believed alchemy held the keys to the eternal. You shift slightly on the grass. Something about this seems hard to reconcile. How can the same person who gave us cold, rational science also chase spiritual transformation through metal and flame? But that's the thing. Newton didn't see a contradiction. In his mind, there was no hard border between science and spirit. To him, all truths came from the same source. Gravity, prophecy, purification, they were all threads in one fabric. If you tugged on one hard enough, the others might unravel too. Scientists still debate whether Newton's alchemical pursuits tarnish his legacy or deepen it. But either way, they show you something important. Newton wasn't just trying to understand how the universe worked. He wanted to know what it was, what it meant, where it was going, and alchemy, ancient, mysterious, and deeply symbolic, offered a different kind of answer. It didn't just deal in metals, it dealt in transformation. The lead becoming gold was a metaphor, a reflection of the soul moving from base to pure, from temporary to eternal. You pause on that word, eternal. That's what Newton was after, not just a clock that ticks, but a truth that remains. A law, yes, but also a promise. And so he studied mercury as if it could whisper secrets. He heated compounds with the hope they might reveal something more than color changes or strange vapors. He believed nature was a divine puzzle, and alchemy, strange as it seems today, was one way to unlock it. You might not believe in alchemy, but you understand the longing behind it, the ache to reach into the unknown and pull out something that lasts, something that doesn't decay, something that might even survive the end of time. And strangely enough, modern chemistry owes something to those early alchemists. Their endless experiments with glassware and fire weren't all nonsense. They laid the groundwork for real discoveries. They taught us how to separate, combine, distill, observe. In chasing eternal truth, they stumbled upon practical ones. Newton didn't stumble. He committed. He risked ridicule. He risked confusion. But he believed the world was built on layers, and science only scratched the surface. Alchemy, in his view, reached deeper. You breathe slowly. There's something deeply human in that. Not just solving problems, but searching for meaning. Wanting both precision and poetry, equations and mystery. Newton never gave up on the physical world, but he also never gave up on the idea that the physical was pointing towards something else. So, when he sat alone, stirring heated mixtures in the dead of night, he wasn't escaping science. He was embracing its full reach. To him, the apple and the angel came from the same tree. That tree might have looked a lot like the one you're lying under now. Its leaves murmur gently in the breeze, and you watch one loosen, twist, and float slowly down toward your chest. Another soft reminder. Everything moves, even what looks still. Even Newton, who spent hours locked in silence, was always reaching, always turning over stones, literal and metaphorical. It's tempting to think of science as pure logic, cold, clinical, clean, But Newton's science was messy, emotional, curious, full of contradictions and unexpected beauty. He didn't just measure the world, he wanted to redeem it. That's why time mattered to him so deeply, because time changes things. It rusts, it erodes, it carries everything forward, sometimes into greatness, sometimes into decay. Newton wasn't just afraid of the end, he was driven by it. He believed that only by understanding the eternal could he make sense of the now. And in his view, alchemy was the practice of resisting decay, of restoring what was lost, not just in metals, but in ideas, in creation itself, in time. You close your eyes again and imagine the quiet room where he worked, the flicker of candlelight, the sulfur in the air, the scribbled margins full of symbols no one else could read, the clock in the corner, ticking away, unaware that its owner was trying to rewrite everything it measured. You're not expected to solve any of this. You're not meant to understand every symbol or decode every riddle. But lying here, under a sky as old as Newton's, you can appreciate the effort, the yearning, the quiet faith that the universe, for all its shadows, still has a center, still has a truth, still has a direction. Maybe Newton never found the secret he was looking for, or maybe he did, and it was too strange, too beautiful, too vast to fit on a page. Either way, he never stopped looking, and neither do we. The leaf that landed on your chest is still there, weightless as thought, as if it chose not to fall, but to pause with you. You don't brush it away. Instead, you let it rest. The way Newton might have let an idea linger before writing it down. Not every discovery announces itself with urgency. Some simply drift in, quiet and obvious in hindsight, like gravity, or like the thought now unfolding in your mind, that Newton, for all his equations and convictions, wasn't searching for control, he was searching for connection, and nowhere was that more evident than in his masterwork, the Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica. You don't have to say it out loud. Just thinking the name makes you feel like you're holding something sacred, because in a way, it was published in 1687. The Principia didn't just change science, it changed the way people thought the universe operated. It wasn't a collection of facts, it was a revelation. You lie back deeper into the earth, imagining that moment in history. The world before Newton's Principia was ruled by intuition. People believed heavier objects fell faster than lighter ones. That celestial and earthly realms followed different rules. That God moved the planets directly, like a puppeteer. Newton shattered that. He showed that the same force that made apples fall also held the moon in orbit, that the same equations that governed cannonballs also governed stars. You think about that for a long while, because it's easy to forget how radical that idea once was, that the universe could be explained with math, that behind the wildness of nature was a code, not magic, not mystery, but rules, precise, elegant rules. Newton didn't just write those rules down, he discovered them with a kind of obsessive clarity. He wasn't always gentle about it, either. He argued fiercely. He fought to be understood. He quarreled with anyone who threatened his vision of the cosmos. But underneath the ambition, underneath the ego, was a man who saw the world as a system and believed that system had to be consistent, beautiful, and complete. You follow that line of thought deeper, and you begin to realize something. The Principia wasn't really about gravity. It was about order. Newton believed the universe could only exist if there was harmony between its parts. If every motion, every orbit, every fall followed laws so fundamental, they didn't need to be rewritten, just revealed. And yet, for all its clarity, the Principia left gaps. One of those gaps troubled Newton deeply: action at a distance. You frown slightly, not because the phrase is complicated, but because you've just now felt its strangeness. Action at a distance. How can one object influence another with nothing between them? How can the earth pull on the moon, or the sun on the earth, without a rope, a rod, a connection? Newton didn't have an answer, and that bothered him. His laws worked. The math was solid, the predictions were accurate, but he couldn't explain why gravity acted the way it did. He could describe its effects, but not its mechanism. That invisible link between bodies, he called it a force. But the truth is, he didn't really know what it was. He even admitted it, reluctantly. I frame no hypotheses. You pause on that phrase, not out of doubt, but out of admiration. Newton could have filled the gap with guesswork. He could have invented a theory just to patch the hole, but he didn't. He left it open, and that, ironically, made the Principia more honest, more human. Some scientists still debate whether that mystery was a failure or a sign of Newton's genius. But you lie here now, knowing it was both, because even a mind as brilliant as his had limits. And Newton, perhaps more than anyone, knew that the deeper you dig into the universe, the more questions you find buried in the soil. You look up at the stars, wondering how many of them are being tugged by unseen hands. Not strings, not magic, just motion, influence, presence. The universe doesn't need to shout to move things. Sometimes it only whispers. Sometimes it just leans. And that's what gravity is, a lean that never ends, a persuasion without touch, a pull you don't notice until you try to resist. Newton believed that this invisible force was evidence of divine design, that God didn't need to intervene constantly. He had already set the rules, wound the clock, and let it run. And yet, Newton never stopped searching for the invisible threads. He wanted to see what lay beneath the curtain. You breathe slowly, and in that breath is the strange comfort of not knowing, the quiet truth that some mysteries aren't failures, they're invitations to wonder, to continue, to ask. The leaf on your chest finally slips off, caught by the breeze. It drifts sideways, not down, not fast, just away. Like gravity chose a softer path this time, or maybe time did, because Newton didn't just ask about force, he asked about space, and about absolute space. The idea that there's a fixed, unchanging backdrop behind everything, a kind of invisible grid upon which all things move. No matter where you are or what you're doing, space is always there, holding you. Time is always flowing, evenly and eternally. Or so he thought. It gave him comfort, that absoluteness. In a chaotic world full of plagues and politics and decay, Newton believed in something stable, unshifting, a frame that wouldn't break, a stage that wouldn't collapse. You lie still now, feeling the space beneath you, the time passing through you, both so silent, so constant, you almost forget they're there. And maybe that's what Newton wanted us to see, not the noise of the universe, but the structure beneath it, the laws holding it together, the peace in knowing that even if we don't understand every force, we're still part of its movement, and if the movement has a source, It might also have a destination. But for now, you don't need to know where it leads. You're here, held, floating softly in the fabric of something Newton spent his life trying to name. You stay still a little longer, as if moving too quickly might unravel something delicate, some invisible thread Newton believed was holding everything together. The leaf is gone now, but the feeling it left lingers, a soft reminder that even the smallest things are part of a larger motion. And Newton? He believed that every motion was accounted for, every change, every force, all of it etched into the fabric of the universe like clockwork. But to him, this clock wasn't running on accident. It was being watched. You let that thought settle like dust in the corners of your mind. Not just time, not just space, but something watching them both. Something constant, something aware. For Newton, that presence was God, but not the distant abstract idea of God. No, Newton's God was meticulous, mathematical, and absolutely necessary. He believed that the universe could not run on its own, not entirely. That even the best designed machine, even one as elegant as creation, needed someone to build it, start it, and ensure it stayed on course. So, while he gave us gravity and motion and calculus, Newton also gave a quiet nod toward divinity in every page of his science. For him, absolute time and absolute space were not just physical ideas. They were reflections of something eternal. Time, he believed, was the censor of God, a way for the Creator to perceive the unfolding of reality, moment by moment, without interruption. You blink slowly, as if time just passed through your own awareness in the same silent way. It's a strange idea, that time isn't just something we experience, but something God experiences through us. That your seconds, your stillness, your breath, they're all part of a shared perception. It's not theology, not entirely. Newton didn't write it as scripture. He wove it into the math. You shift your weight slightly on the grass, imagining a mind so vast that it saw numbers and prayers as part of the same equation. For Newton, every falling object was a kind of testimony. Every orbit was proof. The apple's descent wasn't just a force. It was a line in the divine diary, a universe that only made sense because someone had written it. And he wasn't shy about that belief. In the General Scholium, the appendix to the Principia, Newton described God not as some vague presence, but as eternal and infinite, omniscient and omnipotent. But then he added something subtle. God, he said, does not merely exist. He exists everywhere, in space, in time, in the laws themselves. You consider that now, lying beneath stars that haven't moved in your frame of reference, but are actually streaking across unimaginable distances. You can't feel their motion, but it's happening, just like time, just like the pull that keeps you pressed gently to the earth. Some scientists still debate whether Newton's view of God weakens the purity of his physics. Others say it strengthens it, that it gives context to his quest. But either way, one thing is clear. Newton wasn't doing this to remove wonder from the world. He was doing it to find it. Because wonder, for him, didn't come from mystery alone, it came from structure, from seeing how something impossibly vast could be explained, predicted, trusted, and at the heart of that structure, always ticking, always watching, was time, not just as a measure, but as a presence. You breathe slowly, imagining time as a lens, a way to notice things, a way to track change. Newton believed that nothing could happen without time, and that time couldn't exist without something to observe it. For him, time wasn't a backdrop. It was part of consciousness itself, and that's where his science begins to blur into something more intimate. Because what is consciousness, really? If not the awareness of time passing? Without time, you wouldn't remember yesterday. You wouldn't anticipate tomorrow. You wouldn't even know you were you. Newton didn't have the vocabulary we use today. No talk of neurons or perception or cognition. But he sensed something vital, that to be human is to be immersed in time, and that, perhaps, to be divine is to see all time at once. That might explain why he was so desperate to understand it, why he didn't stop at describing motion, why he traced timelines in scripture and tried to chart the end of history. He didn't just want to solve the universe. He wanted to understand the mind that built it. You turn your head slightly and look up. The stars are still there, still quiet, still burning with a light that left them centuries ago, light that traveled through time and space to meet your eyes. Newton saw that too, that when you observe the heavens, you're looking into the past. That time is not a clean sheet, but a layered one, that everything we see is tinted by delay. And perhaps that's what made it all feel sacred to him, not just because it was grand, but because it was structured delay. The stars don't arrive. They appear. They remind you, gently, that the present is always stitched together from the past. Newton's God didn't hide behind clouds. He hid in the timing, in the consistency, in the subtle way that forces obeyed laws across incomprehensible distances, across centuries, across silence. You close your eyes again, not to sleep, not yet, just to listen better, to feel the soft ticking Newton must have sensed in everything, from the fall of an apple to the slow drift of planets. He believed time was not only essential, it was sacred, a way for the universe to become known, a way for the Creator to remain close, not in form, but in rhythm, in law, in awareness. And as your thoughts settle, something occurs to you that makes your breath catch, just slightly. The idea that maybe you, too, are part of that awareness, not just passing through time, but contributing to it, not just a spectator, but a sensor. The wind brushes past your cheek again. It doesn't say anything, but it arrives, it moves. And in that movement is the mark of time. You don't need to see the clock. You are the clock, and you are still ticking. Your breath is steady now, not measured on purpose, but naturally aligned with something older, something slower. Maybe that's what Newton meant by harmony, not music or sound, but the quiet syncing of things that were never introduced, never forced, yet still somehow move together. The wind, the stars, the thoughts in your head, the pulse in your neck, all of it part of some grand rhythm he believed was built into the bones of the universe. But even rhythm has rules, and rules need space to unfold. Not just physical space, but conceptual space, room for ideas to stretch out and settle in. Newton didn't just want to understand what the universe was. He wanted to define where it happened. And that brings you to a strange, forgotten piece of his thinking, his idea of absolute space. It's easy now to think of space as flexible. Einstein taught us that it bends, stretches, and folds, that it reacts to gravity and curves around mass. But Newton believed in something more rigid, something like a stage, a real, unchanging arena that existed even if no actors ever stepped onto it. Absolute space, he said, is not defined by the things in it. It's not shaped by stars or planets or motion. It simply is a constant, a background that never shifts, a kind of eternal scaffolding on which all of reality is built. You frown slightly, not out of confusion, but out of curiosity, because to imagine that kind of space is almost like imagining silence before sound, or darkness before light, a presence that exists by not doing anything, by not changing, and yet it's essential. Newton used this concept to make sense of motion. After all, how can you say something moves unless you know what it's moving relative to? A rock sitting in your hand doesn't seem to move, but if you throw it, suddenly it has direction, speed, force. All of that makes sense only because there's a frame to measure it against. And Newton believed that frame was real, that the universe wasn't just a web of relative positions, but a structure with actual coordinates. Even if there were no stars, no planets, no observers, space would still be there, unchanging, invisible, but deeply real. You stretch your arms out slowly, letting your fingers graze the grass. You feel it beneath you, but now your mind drifts below that, past the soil, past the crust, past everything solid. What would it be like to lie directly on space itself? Not on Earth, not in orbit, but on that blank, eternal canvas Newton imagined? It wouldn't feel like anything. That's the strange part, because absolute space doesn't push or pull. It doesn't shimmer or hum. It just exists, silent and steady. Like a stage so well built, you forget it's even there. Some scientists still debate whether that idea holds up. Einstein certainly disagreed. In his view, there's no need for a fixed background. Space is defined by relationships, between objects, between events, between perceptions. But Newton needed something more firm, more grounded. His universe didn't just operate, it had placement, and maybe that made him feel safe. Because when you live in a time of uncertainty, plagues, wars, religious upheaval, maybe it helps to believe that at least one thing is solid, that behind all the chaos, there's a geometry that never flexes, a grid that never sags, a truth that doesn't care who wins or loses or where the wind is blowing. That's what absolute space gave Newton, a foundation, a place for the laws of motion to belong, a stage large enough to hold the orbits of planets, the swing of pendulums, the fall of an apple, and still have room for questions. You glance up now, not expecting answers, but just appreciating how vast that stage really is. The stars seem fixed from where you lie, but they're not. You know they're moving, spinning, orbiting, accelerating, and yet it all feels so calm, so still. That's the paradox Newton tried to explain, constant motion within an unchanging frame. He wanted that frame to be divine, or at least divinely inspired, not just an architectural trick, but a gift, something perfect enough to hold imperfection without cracking, something timeless enough to measure time itself. And while modern physics might say he got the frame wrong, the instinct wasn't wrong at all, because even now, we still crave that kind of stability, a place to stand, a way to say, here is where I am. And in Newton's view, the universe provided it, not just through stars or stones or visible markers, but through the very existence of place itself. You breathe in slowly, and for the first time tonight, the space around you feels different, not emptier, just more there, like it's holding you up, invisibly, like it's waiting patiently for whatever you'll do next, or not do. Because motion isn't required, only presence. And that's something Newton never stopped thinking about. That presence precedes action, that before things fall or spin or accelerate, they simply are. And that being, in its purest form, is enough to give the universe meaning. You let that rest in your chest for a moment, not as philosophy, not even as science, just as stillness, as space. Somewhere in the distance, maybe in your memory, you hear the ticking of a clock, not a loud one, not precise, just regular, comforting, the sound of Newton's universe, motion against stillness, change against certainty, time flowing through space, like a stream through a canyon that never shifts. And maybe that's why he believes so deeply in it, because without space, time has nowhere to move, and without time, space has nothing to hold. They need each other, just like the stars need darkness, just like motion needs pause, just like questions need silence. You are, in this moment, both question and silence, held in a structure you can't see, participating in a motion you didn't start, observing something too vast to name, and it's okay not to name it. Newton couldn't either, not completely. He had terms, yes, equations, diagrams, but even he admitted there were parts of space and time that might never be visible, never be touched, only trusted. You exhale slowly, letting that trust settle in, not because you solved anything, but because something inside you recognizes the comfort of being held. And held you are by laws older than language, by a space that doesn't move, and by a story that's still unfolding, slowly, quietly, inevitably. You stay there, quietly cradled by the idea that something invisible is always beneath you, not just grass or soil, but the very idea of place. You don't fall through the earth because gravity holds you. You don't float away because the rules of the universe keep everything where it belongs. Newton believed those rules weren't just scientific, they were sacred, and in their quiet, orderly strength, he found something close to comfort. But not all of it was comforting, because even as he trusted in structure, in time and space and laws so elegant they seemed divinely scripted, Newton was deeply troubled by something else, something that refused to stay still, refused to be held, something that leaked into his work, into his worries, and into the blank spaces between his thoughts. He called it the heat death, though not by that name. He wouldn't have used those words. The phrase came later, with later minds, but the fear was already there, creeping into Newton's calculations like a draft beneath a closed door. You shift slightly, just enough to feel the night air graze your collarbone. It's cool, soothing, but now you imagine a world where that breeze never returns, where the air stops moving, where everything, everywhere, reaches a perfect balance, and then nothing. That's what Newton feared in the quiet corners of his mind. A universe that slowed down not because of catastrophe, but because of perfection. A kind of equilibrium so complete that no motion remained, no difference, no heat, no time. It's a strange thing to be afraid of. Not war, not fire, but stillness. A stillness so absolute, it erases everything. At the time, Newton couldn't name entropy, no one had yet, but he sensed it. He noticed how systems seemed to lose energy, how movement faded unless something intervened, how warmth slipped away. He wrote about it vaguely, cautiously. He didn't build a theory, but he left a trail of notes, of hesitations, of observations that suggested he saw the possibility of an end not with a bang, but with silence. You lie there now, beneath a sky that still twinkles, and you try to imagine that silence. A universe with no gradients, no friction, no difference between now and later because there is no later. Just sameness, forever. Some scientists still debate whether Newton truly understood what he was sensing, whether his scattered notes point to the same entropy we now calculate and fear. But, whatever he called it, he felt its chill. He understood that perfection might not be paradise. It might be paralysis. He knew the motion required imbalance, that systems need tension to stay alive, that without something to push against, everything stops. And so, as much as he loved the idea of order, he also feared what it might lead to when taken to its extreme. And he wasn't alone in this. Later thinkers, armed with newer math, would build on that worry, showing that the universe tends toward disorder, not out of malice, but out of probability. That heat always spreads, that energy always diffuses, that given enough time, all stars will burn out, all motion will stop, and space itself will grow cold and quiet. But Newton didn't need those equations. He saw the beginning of them in candle flames and cooling metal, in pendulums that didn't swing forever, in celestial bodies that required corrections and care. He knew that even the most perfect systems still had cracks, and through those cracks, the end crept in. You shift your gaze to the stars again. They seem eternal, but they're not. They're dying, slowly, burning fuel they can't replace. And even that burning, the flicker and glow you admire, only hastens their end. Still, there's something strangely peaceful in that. Because Newton didn't look away from this. He didn't panic. He didn't despair. Instead, he wrote, he studied, he questioned, and through it all, he continued to search for patterns, not because he thought he could stop the decay, but because he believed understanding it mattered. To him, even the end had order. That's a powerful idea. That finality doesn't mean failure. That just because something ends doesn't mean it didn't follow the rules. In fact, Newton seemed to believe the opposite, that the fact it ends proves the rules are real. And that brings you back to the idea of time. Because what is time, if not the measure of change? And what happens to time when there's nothing left to change? You let that question sit with you like a stone in your hand, heavy, cool, unanswered. Maybe Newton didn't have an answer either. Maybe that's why he calculated, recalculated, scribbled and scratched and searched. Not to avoid the end, but to define it, to recognize it, to prepare for it, not in fear, but in reverence. You breathe in deeply, the air still here, still moving. The universe hasn't reached equilibrium yet. The stars haven't gone out. You're still warm. The clock is still ticking. But somewhere deep in the gears of the cosmos, Newton sensed that it wouldn't tick forever. And that's what makes the present so astonishing. The fact that it exists, that there's still motion, still light, still contrast, still possibility, because the end, however quiet it may be, hasn't arrived. There's still room for movement, for thought, for questions whispered into the dark. You close your eyes again, not to escape, but to honor the quiet that Newton feared and cherished all at once, the stillness that marks both the beginning of a thought and the end of one. You feel your heartbeat, steady and soft, proof that not everything has balanced out. Not yet. The universe still stirs, and so do you. Your heartbeat continues, steady and quiet, as if echoing the cosmos in miniature. It's not loud, not forceful, but it's undeniably there, one soft thud after another, a personal rhythm tucked inside the larger symphony of the universe. Newton would have called that consistency beautiful, not because it was dramatic, but because it was reliable, predictable, measurable. That's what drew him so deeply to pendulums. You picture one now, a long rod, a heavy weight, swinging slowly in perfect arcs, forward, backward, never too fast, never too far, just enough. To Newton, a pendulum wasn't just a clever machine, it was a metaphor, a pulse, a visible heartbeat of time itself. He studied them obsessively, watched how the arc shortened over time, measured how gravity tugged the mass back into line, again and again. He saw that in a frictionless world, the pendulum would swing forever. But we don't live in that world. There's drag, there's resistance. The world slows things down. And still, the pendulum swings. You lie back and feel that rhythm in your own breath. In, pause, out, pause. Like something is swinging inside you, too. Something primal and patient. That's what Newton loved about pendulums. They carry the illusion of eternity, even while betraying it. A perfect pattern, slowly decaying. A kind of honesty dressed in motion. He used them to measure time, of course, not just seconds, but precision itself. Pendulums became the backbone of early clocks. Their gentle swings defined what a moment was. And Newton trusted that rhythm to anchor his equations, to frame the tempo of a universe in motion. But he also saw something else, something beneath the swing. Because even a pendulum in motion hints at something still, at a center, a place of perfect balance, always passed through but never paused upon. That invisible midpoint, that was sacred to Newton. It represented more than balance. It represented truth. You picture it, the exact center of a swing, a place that isn't a destination, but a constant. Every motion leads back to it. Every deviation is temporary. Every return, inevitable. Some scientists still debate whether Newton saw the pendulum as more than metaphor. But knowing his mind, his love for both mechanics and meaning, it's hard to believe he didn't. Because to him, physical objects weren't just material, they were messages. If you knew how to read them, you could learn something eternal. That's what the pendulum whispered, that time flows in motion, but is revealed in repetition. You look up now, your eyes tracing the branches above you like arcs. They sway a little, left to right, like they too are caught in some pendulum's pull. The wind moves, then stops. A bird lifts, then settles. Even chaos has rhythm. Even randomness dances on a beat you can't quite hear. Newton believed that beat was divine. He thought of God not as a meddler, constantly tweaking the machine, but as the origin of the laws themselves. A composer who wrote the symphony of physics and then let it play. The pendulum didn't need a push after every swing. It only needed the initial impulse, and the law of gravity would do the rest. And yet, Newton also knew that pendulums slow down. Friction takes its toll. Air resists. The string stretches, thins, wears. Eventually, the motion ends, not because the rules failed, but because they were followed too perfectly. Every swing gives a little away. And that loss, it's not a flaw, it's part of the design. That's what makes the rhythm precious. It doesn't last forever. It's a gift you get for a while, then it fades. That fading, that slowing down, that's where meaning lives. You breathe again, noticing how each breath is slightly different from the last, slightly shallower, slightly deeper, the same, but not, repetition softened by time. That's how Newton saw existence, not as exact copies, but as echoes, pendulums that return, not to the same moment, but to the same kind of moment, cycles that aren't perfect loops, but spirals, repeating, but always moving forward. And in the middle of all those spirals is stillness, not the stillness of death, not the terrifying equilibrium of entropy, but the stillness of truth, the point every swing must pass through, the silent axis that holds motion together. Newton believed in that point, not just mathematically, but spiritually. He thought the universe had a center, not a location in space, but a source, a meaning, a pulse behind the pulses. Some called him strange for that. Some still do. But maybe it isn't strange at all to believe that the rhythm of everything must come from somewhere. You glance down at your own chest again, rising, falling. You feel your heartbeat beneath it, and you think, this is a pendulum, too. Not perfect, not eternal, but regular enough to guide you through the night. And you wonder, what if all life is just a pendulum swinging between questions and answers, between seeking and resting, between birth and return? Newton might have agreed. He saw motion as not just what happens, but as how it happens, with pattern, with pause, with grace. You close your eyes once more, not to leave the thought behind, but to move closer to it. Inside the darkness behind your eyelids, you feel the rhythm more clearly. The stillness between thoughts, the midpoint between heartbeats, the place Newton never stopped looking for. It's not far. It never was. Somewhere inside that midpoint, just a breath between beats, a flicker between thoughts, you find yourself drifting again, not asleep, but also not fully awake, hovering, like the pendulum at the top of its arc, still for a moment before falling back into motion. Newton would have liked this part of the story, not the part where things accelerate or collide, but the quiet point where opposites meet, where tension pauses, where time exhales. Because if there's anything Newton pursued as fervently as motion, it was balance, not just symmetry in formulas, but in meaning. He believed that the universe, though vast and in constant flux, obeyed a deeper kind of equilibrium, a design that allowed for both movement and stillness, for beginnings and endings. And nowhere was this belief more apparent than in his thoughts about the end of time. Yes, Newton, the man of laws and logic, spent countless hours calculating when history itself would end. Not symbolically, not poetically, but quite literally. He believed the Bible, particularly the prophetic books like Daniel and Revelation, contained encoded timelines set by divine hand. And Newton wanted to solve them. You lie very still as that idea unfolds in your mind. A man who discovered gravity also trying to forecast Armageddon, not because he wanted to scare people, but because he was curious, deeply, almost painfully curious. To Newton, time wasn't just something you measured with gears and pendulums. It was something you could count, plot, predict, complete. And so, he did. In private letters and notebooks, many unpublished during his lifetime, Newton calculated multiple possible dates for the end of the world. The year 2060 appears in several of them. But he was cautious. He insisted that these calculations weren't final prophecies. He called them hypotheses, and warned against superstition. Still, he couldn't stop himself from looking, because to him, history was a clock, too, ticking, progressing not in circles, but in a long, winding line that pointed somewhere very specific. You breathe slowly and try to imagine that, a world where the rise and fall of empires, the alignment of planets, and the passages of ancient scripture all connect, interlocked like cogs in some divine machinery. That was Newton's vision, a universe where nothing was accidental, where everything from plague to prophecy was part of a pattern. Some scientists still debate whether Newton's prophetic interests weaken his scientific legacy. But the more you lie here, the more that question feels irrelevant. Because Newton wasn't trying to impress the world. He was trying to understand it, all of it, whether that meant motion or meaning, planets or prophecy. And while he never published his end-of-time theories in his major works, they weren't side projects. They were central to his worldview. He believed that just as God had created natural laws to govern space and motion, he had also set spiritual laws to govern time and destiny. You open your eyes and gaze up at the stars, those old companions of prophecy. People have always looked up and wondered what they meant, what they knew, what they foretold. Newton was no different. He just brought mathematics to the mystery. And you begin to see why. Because if time has a beginning, and Newton firmly believed it did, then doesn't it also make sense that it might have an end? You stretch one hand above you toward the sky, feeling a strange mix of awe and humility. You are part of that timeline, somewhere on it, moving forward 1 second at a time, not knowing the end point, only trusting that there is one. That was Newton's quiet obsession. Not destruction, not fire, just completion. A finishing line not marked by panic, but by fulfillment. A moment when the universe no longer needed to tick, when the clock could rest. And though some of his assumptions may have been flawed, his astronomy outdated, his scriptural interpretations subjective, the impulse behind them was timeless. The need to know where we're going. The desire to feel that all of this has a purpose. Even now, lying beneath these ancient stars, you can feel the tug of that question. You can't see the full shape of time, but you feel the pull of something distant. Not a countdown, not an alarm, just a direction. Newton believed the end of time wouldn't be a void, but a transformation. The universe wouldn't stop existing. It would change states, like water to vapor, like pendulum to rest. He imagined a new kind of existence, one without decay, one outside the bounds of the physical laws he so meticulously defined. You close your hand now and bring it back to your chest. The rhythm there is still steady, still present, but for the first time, you notice how strange it is to feel your heart moving in a world that itself may someday stop. It doesn't frighten you. In fact, it feels grounding, because Newton didn't teach us to fear the end. He taught us to pay attention to it, to imagine it clearly, to approach it not with dread, but with curiosity. That was his gift. He gave us gravity, yes, but he also gave us a way to think about time that stretched beyond clocks and calendars. He asked us to consider that maybe, just maybe, time is telling a story, and that story has a final sentence. But we haven't reached it yet. Not tonight. For now, you lie between chapters, between swings of the pendulum, between questions and answers, and somewhere in that space, in that slow, sacred pause, Newton is still asking, still calculating, still watching the stars for signs, and you're here, too, not solving, just listening, letting the rhythm carry you. The stillness deepens, not like a void, but like a page between paragraphs. You haven't fallen asleep, not yet. You're just suspended, mentally, physically, almost cosmically, between one thought and the next. Newton would have found this moment familiar, not because he was ever truly still, but because his mind often hovered in this in-between space, where the boundaries of science blurred into questions too large for numbers alone. That's where he began thinking about creation itself. You shift slightly, eyes still open to the sky. If time had a beginning, Newton wondered, then so must the universe, not just as a place, but as a process. Something had to start it. Something had to choose when the clock would begin ticking. For Newton, that wasn't a guess. That was a certainty. The universe, he believed, was not eternal. It hadn't always been here. There was a moment, however distant, when it emerged from nothing, and what followed wasn't chaos, but structure. Deliberate, rational, exquisite structure. You breathe slowly and imagine that. The first instant, the first motion, not a roar, not a bang, but a shift, a decision. One moment, there was silence. The next, gravity, light, space, time. Some scientists still debate how the universe truly began. The Big Bang is our best guess now, a theory not of explosion, but of sudden expansion. But Newton didn't have that model. He had something more personal, a creator with intent. And while he couldn't describe the origin in modern terms, he believed that the evidence was everywhere, in the arcs of planets, in the balance of forces, in the way mathematics could explain the physical world so precisely, it almost felt inevitable. That was his proof, not a miracle in the clouds, but a law on a page. The fact that equations work was, to Newton, the loudest testimony of a purposeful beginning. You let that thought settle. Because it's easy to take for granted, this idea that the universe follows rules, that motion isn't random, that objects don't drift endlessly without reason. But to Newton, this was astonishing, sacred, even. He believed that structure wasn't just present, it was baked in, from the very first moment. That meant the laws of motion weren't invented by humans. We just discovered them, like uncovering ancient ruins buried beneath centuries of dust. Gravity had always been there, waiting, watching, quiet. You touch your fingertips together slowly. They meet in the middle with such precision. Muscles contract, nerves fire, bones hold steady. Even your body, here in the grass, follows the laws Newton described. That's what amazed him most, that the same principles applied to stars and to people, to cannonballs and to comets. No difference, no exception. He called it universal gravitation, the idea that every object in the universe attracts every other object. The apple, yes, but also the moon, also you, also the dust drifting just above the ground. It wasn't just about falling, it was about belonging, about connection. Newton saw that connection not as mystical, but as measurable. He gave it a formula, a clear, elegant equation that worked every time. And suddenly, the cosmos wasn't just beautiful, it was predictable. You lie there now, letting the magnitude of that settle around you. Before Newton, people watched the skies with awe. After Newton, they watched them with understanding. He didn't take the wonder away. He just gave it scaffolding. Some scientists still debate whether our current models have outgrown Newton's relativity, quantum mechanics. They've added nuance, added complexity, but Newton's vision was foundational. It gave us a way to talk about motion that held true for centuries, and still does. In most of the universe, he saw the apple fall, but he also saw the pattern behind the fall. And that's what made his view of creation so profound. It wasn't just that the universe had a beginning, it was that the beginning came with rules. And those rules didn't just allow life to happen, they made life possible. You glance at the stars again, wondering what laws they're obeying right now. They burn, they spin, they collapse and reform, all without breaking the framework Newton helped define. But Newton didn't stop at the physical laws. He believed there were spiritual laws too, a kind of dual language to reality, one written in mathematics, the other in meaning. And to understand creation fully, you had to read both. That's why he spent so much time on Scripture. Not out of blind faith, but out of deep respect. He believed the Creator who designed the stars also left a record in words. And if the physical universe was a kind of machine, then history was its narrative. You don't have to share that belief to appreciate the sincerity behind it. Newton wasn't trying to convert anyone. He wasn't preaching, he was listening to the whispers of the universe, and trying to trace them back to their source. And in that source, he imagined not just power, but intention. That's what separates a machine from a miracle. Not function, but purpose. Newton believed the universe worked because someone wanted it to. Not arbitrarily, not accidentally, but with a clarity that echoed through space and time like a melody repeating in perfect time. You close your eyes and you try to hear that echo, not as music, but as rhythm, as alignment, as the structure that makes stillness feel secure and motion feel meaningful. Because in Newton's view, we don't live in a universe that became ordered. We live in one that began with order already inside it. And that means every fall, every rise, every moment of rest, like this one, is part of a story still unfolding. You breathe again, and the air feels a little more sacred. Not because it's different, but because you're more aware of the structure it rides on, the silence behind the sound, the law behind the life, and for a moment, you sense what Newton must have sensed. That creation didn't just happen, it continues, right now, right here, with you. You breathe in once more, and the air enters you with such quiet cooperation that it feels less like an act of the lungs and more like a conversation between body and world, between breath and the laws that govern it. Newton might have smiled at that, not because it's poetic, but because it's exact. A body inhales, air moves, pressure shifts, predictable, measurable, inevitable, and yet, somehow, beautiful. To him, beauty wasn't an extra. It wasn't an accident. It was built in. You let that idea ripple through your thoughts. Because when most people think of Newton, they imagine dry equations and stiff portraits. But buried in his notebooks, in the margins, in the careful curves of his diagrams, was something else, something softer, a reverence not just for order, but for elegance, because elegance to Newton was the sign of a deeper truth. He believed that if something was real, truly real, it would not only work, it would fit, the pieces would align, the formulas would simplify. The world wouldn't just function, it would harmonize. And when that happened, you weren't just looking at numbers anymore. You were looking at meaning. You rolled gently to your side. the grass rustling beneath you like static from another age. Everything feels light now, not because it's weightless, but because it's supported, as if the laws Newton studied are still at work around you, still holding the sky in place, still keeping your atoms from drifting apart. It's easy to forget, in the noise of daily life, how much of your world is built on invisible certainty. You don't float off the planet when you jump. You don't fall endlessly through your mattress. You don't wake up on the ceiling, because gravity, though silent, is always speaking. And Newton heard it. But he didn't just listen. He translated. He captured something enormous, an unseen pull between all things, and made it something you could write on a chalkboard. He made simplicity out of mystery. Some scientists still debate whether beauty belongs in science at all, whether elegance is just our bias for symmetry. But Newton believed the opposite. He believed that elegance was evidence, that a theory wasn't truly right until it was beautiful. That's why he obsessed over the shape of orbits, not because they were dramatic, but because they repeated with such calm precision. Each sweep of a planet, each arc of a moon, traced the same path again and again, as if the universe were drawing circles for its own comfort. He believed those paths were reflections, not of chaos, but of intention. And in that intention, he found not coldness, but grace. You close your eyes again, and this time, your thoughts slow into soft loops. You imagine the Earth's orbit as a stroke of a brush, steady, smooth, elliptical, always returning, never the same, but always familiar. You imagine Newton watching it, measuring it, falling just a little more in love with the idea that the same force pulling the Earth around the sun is what tugged the apple from the branch. That was the moment everything changed, when heaven and earth stopped being separate categories, when the cosmos became one system. Before Newton, the stars were divine, distant, unreachable. After Newton, they were still divine, but also understandable. The same math that described a ball rolling down a hill could describe a comet arcing toward the sun. And you live in the world he revealed. It's easy to forget that. Easy to treat gravity as boring, to glance at the moon and think only of tides or calendars. But Newton didn't see boredom in repetition. He saw trust. He saw consistency. To him, the moon wasn't just a chunk of rock. It was proof that the universe remembered its own rules. That remembering, that repeating, that's what gave the universe rhythm. And rhythm, Newton believed, was more than convenience. It was a kind of compassion, a way the cosmos told you, this will happen again. You can rely on it. Somewhere, deep in that idea, is a comfort you didn't know you needed, because so much of life feels unpredictable, uncertain. But gravity, it never forgets. The planets don't skip a beat. The equations still hold, even when nothing else does. You inhale again, and it feels like you're breathing in that rhythm, letting it settle into your bones. Newton might say it's not just gravity you're feeling, it's continuity, a thread stretching backward to the origin of the universe and forward into whatever comes next. You're part of that thread, tied to every falling leaf, every turning moon, every spinning galaxy, not metaphorically, literally. And Newton would tell you that's the beauty of it. Because even when he couldn't see the mechanism, even when he struggled with action at a distance, or the mystery of entropy, he trusted the pattern. He believed that the universe, even in its uncertainties, still operated on principles more stable than any one moment. And so, he searched for those principles, in the laboratory, in scripture, in the stars, in silence, not to master the universe, but to honor it, to meet its mystery with precision, to answer its grandeur with questions that were, in themselves, a kind of praise. You lie still now, more aware of the structure around you, not the branches and grass, but the deeper framework, the scaffolding you never see, the elegance you feel without knowing it. Newton felt it too, and maybe that's what he left us, not just a set of equations, but a way of noticing, a lens for wonder, a rhythm for thought. And as you listen now, not with ears, but with stillness, you begin to hear it, not as a ticking clock, not as falling apples, but as quiet assurance that you are part of something beautifully, reliably, gently ruled, and that is enough. The night feels even softer now. The air isn't cooler, exactly. It's just slower, like it's remembered the pace it's supposed to move at. Or maybe you've remembered how to match it. Either way, there's a stillness around you that doesn't feel empty. It feels complete, a silence that isn't waiting for anything. It simply is. Newton would have paid attention to that kind of silence, not to fill it, but to measure it, not with sound or noise, but with presence, with tension, because sometimes the most meaningful things are what you don't hear, what doesn't happen, what remains still, even as everything else moves. That was the problem Newton never quite solved, the idea of absolute rest. You lie back and think about that, because rest in your world is easy to define. You sit down, you lie down, you stop moving. But Newton didn't see rest as a matter of convenience. He saw it as a state, a condition, a reference point. In his theory of motion, there's always a question. Resting relative to what? If you're on a train moving smoothly and you toss a ball into the air, it comes right back down to your hand. It feels like you're at rest, even though you're hurtling down a track. That's relativity. Not Einstein's kind, Newton's kind. The idea that motion isn't always what it seems, but Newton didn't want to stop there. He wanted to know, is there a place in the universe where an object could be truly still? Not still relative to another object, but still in the absolute sense. No movement, no momentum, no shift, just nothing. He called it absolute rest, and he believed it had to exist, at least in theory, because for motion to be defined, for acceleration to make sense, there needed to be something still to measure it against. You shift on the grass, feeling how your body presses into the earth, and you wonder, am I moving right now? The earth is spinning. It's orbiting the sun. The sun is moving through the galaxy. The galaxy itself is drifting through the cosmos. There is, in a very real way, no such thing as stillness. But Newton tried to imagine it anyway, and in doing so, he ran into a kind of existential question, not just where is absolute rest, but what would it even feel like? If nothing around you moved, not the stars, not the particles, not even time itself, would you know you were there? Some scientists still debate whether absolute rest is meaningful at all. Modern physics tells us everything is relative. That motion only matters when compared to something else. But Newton was haunted by the idea that maybe beneath all the relativity, there was something fixed, something unmoving, a cosmic zero. And that haunted him not because it was scary, but because it was unreachable, a state of perfect stillness you could describe but never occupy. You breathe slowly and begin to feel how strange that is, to be alive in a universe where motion is constant. and yet to long for a moment of complete pause. Maybe that's why we sleep, not just to rest the body, but to return to something quieter, to stop racing forward, to hover. Newton never said that, but he might have agreed, because absolute rest, in his view, wasn't just a question of physics. It was a destination, a condition the universe might one day reach, a final alignment where all motion ceases, not from failure, but from balance. He saw the cosmos like a wound-up clock, and clocks don't tick forever. Eventually, the springs relax, the tension releases, and what's left is not destruction, it's stillness. You let your hand rest on your chest again, feeling your own internal clock, the heartbeat that slows when you breathe deeply, the rise and fall that becomes less pronounced the longer you lie here. And you wonder, what would it feel like if everything stopped? If the stars stopped spinning, if gravity stopped pulling, if electrons stopped dancing, not because something broke, but because everything reached equilibrium. It wouldn't be cold. It wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be anything. It would just be. That's the paradox Newton lived with. He was a man of motion who dreamed of rest, a scientist who described acceleration and force and orbit, and yet longed to understand what it meant to be completely, utterly still. Somewhere in his search, he realized that rest and motion weren't opposites. They were partners. Each made the other legible, meaningful, real, and you, here on the grass, feel both. The stillness of your body, the quiet churn of the earth beneath it. You are not at rest, but you are resting. That distinction would have mattered to him, because Newton knew that the laws didn't care about intention. They described what is, not what you want. And still, he chased after rest, not to change the laws, but to understand their limit, to ask, what happens when the motion ends? You glance at the sky. It looks the same, but in truth, it's not. Every star has moved, even if by a hair. Every atom has shifted, if only slightly. The universe is restless by design. And yet, in the heart of all that movement, there is something that remains unchanged, the structure. That's what Newton clung to. Even if everything moves, the laws that govern the motion do not. Gravity doesn't fluctuate. Inertia doesn't hesitate. The rules are constant, even when nothing else is. And maybe that's what absolute rest really is. Not a physical location, not a motionless point, but a principle, a truth you can rely on, a center that doesn't spin, a silence that doesn't vanish. You close your eyes and feel that center now, not beneath you, but within you. Not stillness of the body, but stillness of the knowing. That whatever happens, whatever accelerates or decays or drifts away, there is something beneath it that stays. Something that holds, and in that holding, you find peace. You let that peace linger, not as a reward, but as a recognition. A kind of shared understanding between you and the night, between your breath and the quiet rhythm of everything beyond it. Newton believed in that rhythm, even when it couldn't be touched, especially then. Because the things you can't touch, he thought, might be the things that matter most. And that brings you to one of the stranger truths he wrestled with, one that bothered him deeply, even though it came from his own ideas, a question that tugged at the very structure he worked so hard to define. What if the universe, unwound, not exploded, not collapsed, but gradually, gently, stopped? Not because it failed, but because it completed its motion, like a pendulum that, given enough time and no external force, simply finds its way to rest. a kind of universal exhale, permanent, unreversed. Newton didn't have the modern language of entropy or thermodynamics, but he noticed something peculiar. Everything that moves slows, everything that's warm cools, everything with order begins to drift toward disorder. You turn your face to the side, resting your cheek against the grass. There's warmth still there, left over from the day, but already fading. You feel it leaving slowly, almost politely. No drama, no sound, just gone. That's what Newton saw, too. He saw it in pendulums, in the wobble of orbits, in the decay of systems that, left alone, did not stay perfect. And that terrified him, not because it was violent, but because it was inevitable. He imagined a universe that had been wound up by God, set into motion with flawless laws and perfect conditions. But he also understood clocks, and he knew that even the finest timepiece, once started, would eventually tick down, not from error, but from design. Some scientists still debate whether Newton truly anticipated what we now call thermal equilibrium, the end state of everything being the same temperature, the same pressure, the same everything. A place where motion no longer matters because nothing moves. Not up or down, not in or out, just balance. Unchanging and unchangeable. He didn't write it that way, of course, but he circled the idea. He noted the losses, the inefficiencies, the quiet, creeping drift toward stillness, and it disturbed him, because Newton believed in purpose, in motion that mattered, in events that led somewhere, a world that slowly slipped into sameness. That didn't sound like destiny. That sounded like silence winning. You take another breath, slower this time. You're not in a hurry. Nothing is. And for a moment, you feel what Newton must have felt. The tension between elegance and erosion, between structure and entropy. Because the same rules that hold the planets in orbit are the ones that predict their eventual end. The same gravity that makes you feel grounded also ensures that stars will collapse, that galaxies will drift apart, that the universe eventually might lose its sharpness and blur into stillness. And yet, Newton didn't give up. He still wrote the Principia, still described the laws, still believed that everything could be understood, not to prevent the end, but to witness it truthfully, to recognize that even fading is governed by form. That's what makes his view so enduring. He didn't deny loss. He didn't pretend that systems remained perfect. But he believed that even the unraveling followed rules. And those rules, in their consistency, offered comfort. Because if there's a pattern to the end, then the end isn't chaos. It's closure. You lie still, no longer trying to separate motion from meaning. They've merged now, just like Newton believed they would. Every fall is a story. Every pause, a punctuation. The universe doesn't just move, it says something as it moves. And maybe that's why Newton feared stillness so much. Not because he hated silence, but because he saw in it the possibility that the message would stop, that the laws would still exist, but have nothing left to govern. That thought might have kept him awake some nights. It might be what sent him back to the scriptures, back to prophecy, back to the idea that this wasn't just a machine, but a story, with a beginning, middle, and a final line. Somewhere in his notes, he mused that the universe might one day stop ticking. That time itself could cease, not explode, not reset, just conclude, like the final moment of a symphony. No crash, no whisper, just the last note fading into air. And you wonder, what if that's true? What if time, like a thread, can be fully unraveled? What if gravity loses its grip? What if every force runs out of energy, not suddenly, but so slowly that no one notices? What if the very concept of change stops applying? You don't panic, you don't resist. Instead, you marvel, because Newton did too. He didn't see inevitability as defeat. He saw it as truth. And truth, even when it leads to an ending, is still something worth loving. You place your hand back on your chest again. The beat is still there, soft, measured, and you think, this, too, follows a law. This motion is not random, it's allowed, it's granted, it's part of the unwinding, but it hasn't reached the end. Not yet. You still move, the stars still burn, the air still hums, however faintly. And in that hum, you hear something familiar. Not music, not a voice, just a pattern, a structure, a promise that things may change, but they never do so without form. Newton believed that, and now, maybe, so do you. You let the hum settle deeper now, as if it's wrapping around your ribs, coiling gently like a ribbon of soft mathematics. It's not a sound exactly, it's more like a recognition. Like your body knows what it means to move, to rest, and to slowly lose energy in a way that's not sad, just expected, natural, kind. Newton didn't call it entropy. He didn't use the language of modern thermodynamics, but he saw it, the idea that everything eventually settles, that perfection isn't permanent, and motion isn't forever. What fascinated him, though, was this. Even decline had its rules. You imagine him again, hunched over a desk, scribbling by candlelight, quill tapping the edge of his teeth, eyes narrowing at something that doesn't quite fit. Because for all his brilliance, Newton encountered things that bothered him, tiny discrepancies, data points that refused to obey. Take the precession of the moon's orbit. His equations almost nailed it. Almost, but not quite. There was always this slight wobble, this refusal to align with the tidy laws of gravitation. He hated it, not because it meant failure, but because it meant incompletion. You understand that, don't you? That little ache when something's just off. Not broken, just unresolved. Newton carried that ache through much of his life. Not loudly, not publicly, but always there, like a faint ringing in the back of his mind. And that's when he did something unexpected. Instead of rewriting his laws, he believed they were right. The world, he concluded, was just too complex for one mind, any mind, to solve alone. Maybe the equations were perfect, but the universe was crowded, with other planets, other tugs, other variables he couldn't see yet. That humility was hidden beneath his certainty. Newton was never short on confidence, but deep down, he knew some mysteries endure. And that's where you drift to now, into the space between solved and unsolved. You're not uncomfortable there. You're not confused. You're curious, gently, sleepily curious. Because Newton showed that you could live a whole life inside the questions, and that didn't make your work less meaningful. It made it real. So, when he watched the planets not quite move as expected, or the tides not quite align, he didn't panic. He adjusted, recalculated, wondered what he hadn't seen yet. His faith wasn't just in God or gravity. It was in the possibility of clarity, that even the strangest behavior had a rule, hidden somewhere, waiting to be revealed. You look up now, not with urgency, but with quiet anticipation. Somewhere above you, the stars continue their ancient loops. Some of them wobble, some of them flicker, but none of them are lost. They're just participating in a system you can't fully see from here. Yet. And maybe that's okay. Because Newton didn't get to finish the story. No one does. He built a foundation, a framework. But he left gaps, not mistakes, invitations. Places for others to continue, to question, to wonder, to gently say, this part doesn't quite fit, yet. Some scientists still debate whether Newton's obsession with completion held him back or pushed him forward, whether his fear of being wrong made him more precise or more stubborn. But you're not here to judge him. You're here to understand the weight he carried, because it's a familiar weight. It's the feeling that comes when you look at your own life and ask, why doesn't everything add up? Why does effort sometimes fall short? Why do things drift out of sync, no matter how careful you are? Newton didn't have those answers either, but he gave us something better, a way to approach the unknown without fear, a way to keep moving even when the numbers wobble. And that's what you're doing now. Moving, not in haste, but in trust. The trust that even misalignment can be part of a larger pattern. The faith that unresolved isn't unworthy. You adjust your body, just slightly, and feel the grass bend and support you. Tiny forces shift, pressure equalizes. Your weight is still here, but it's being held. That's how gravity works, not by crushing, but by cradling. And as you lie there, you realize Newton's world wasn't a cold machine. It was a structure built to hold mysteries gently, to carry the pieces even when they didn't yet click together. Somewhere, he imagined, was a system that did include everything, every wobble, every anomaly, every question. But it would take more time, more minds, more silence, so he waited. And you wait now, too, not for an answer, but for rest. Because part of what Newton taught us is this. You don't need all the answers to be at peace. You just need to know the questions are valid, that the patterns, however elusive, still exist. So, when your thoughts begin to scatter, when your mind drifts toward the unsolved, you don't fight it. You don't chase resolution. You just breathe. And that's enough. You imagine a candle, like the one Newton worked by, flickering at the edge of a page, not guttering, not flaring, just steady. Its light isn't enough to see the entire room, but it's enough to see the sentence you're writing, the formula you're checking, the mystery you're welcoming. And maybe that's the point, not to banish the dark, but to light a small space within it. That's what Newton did, not perfectly, not finally, but sincerely. And now, so do you. The candle in your mind burns low but steady, just like before. Not to reveal everything, but to give shape to the dark. That's all Newton ever really wanted, in the end. Not to conquer mystery, but to illuminate it, to make space for the question. Even if the answer never arrived, you let that idea settle in your chest as the breeze shifts ever so slightly, brushing the side of your face like a whispered reminder. Nothing is fully still, but nothing is fully lost either. Because Newton, for all his certainty, was deeply familiar with the incomplete. It wasn't just his work in physics, it was his work in alchemy. Yes, you heard that right. The same man who gave the world the laws of motion and universal gravitation also spent years in the secretive study of substances, potions, and transformation. Not for show, not for superstition, but because he believed that nature had more to reveal. That hidden beneath matter was a divine logic, waiting to be unlocked. You shift slightly, your fingers grazing a stem of grass, and imagine Newton in a stone-walled laboratory, vials, metals, a furnace breathing heat into the silence. He's not mixing spells, he's searching for purity, for a way to understand the material world, not just as it appears, but as it truly is. He believed in transmutation, not just metaphorically, literally. He thought base metals could become noble ones. He believed there was a hidden substance, the philosopher's stone, that could transform anything, purify it, even extend life. And you know what's strange? As odd as it sounds now, this wasn't fringe thinking in his time. Alchemy was part of the same quest as astronomy, medicine, and theology, to understand the design of the universe. Because back then, the separation between science and spirit wasn't as sharp. Newton didn't draw a hard line between the physical and the divine. To him, discovering the rules of nature was one and the same with discovering the intentions of its creator. Some scientists still debate whether this part of Newton's life undermines his legacy, whether his work in alchemy should be seen as brilliant curiosity or misguided distraction. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the better question is, what does it mean to search for transformation? Because that's what alchemy was, at its heart. A longing to turn the impure into the pure, the unfinished into the complete, the ordinary into the divine. And isn't that what science still does, in its own way? It takes confusion and seeks clarity. It turns doubt into understanding. It accepts the messy, the noisy, the seemingly random, and tries to reveal the harmony underneath. You feel a kind of warmth now, not in your body, but in your awareness. A glow that comes from realizing something important. Newton's pursuit of transformation wasn't just chemical, it was human. He wasn't trying to cheat nature. He was trying to be part of its perfection. That's why he studied optics too, light, refraction. He shattered white light through a prism and discovered that it wasn't pure at all. It was composite, full of hidden color, not broken, but revealed. That prism became a kind of symbol for his entire life. Take something that looks simple, motion, time, light, and look deeper. Break it apart, analyze it, and then rebuild it into meaning. You open your eyes for a moment, and the moon above you seems sharper now. Not because anything changed, but because you're seeing it through Newton's lens. A sphere held in place by forces you can't feel but can trust. A body reflecting light that itself holds multitudes. To most, it's just the moon. To Newton, it was an artifact of universal law, a reminder that even something so constant could still be explored, measured, marveled at. He didn't just see objects, he saw systems. He didn't just look for answers, he looked for unity, a single set of principles that could explain everything from falling apples to celestial orbits to the colors in a beam of light. He came close, closer than most ever have. But he also knew there were limits. He knew there were things he didn't understand, things no one did. That's why, despite his fame, he was cautious, not just in his math, but in his public life. He delayed publishing, he picked fights, he held grudges. He struggled with being misunderstood, because underneath the precision was a man who desperately wanted to be right, not for ego, but for truth. And when you're devoted to truth, being misunderstood doesn't feel like annoyance. It feels like grief. You let that thought linger, because maybe you've felt it, too, that quiet ache of knowing something deeply and having no one else see it quite the way you do. It's a lonely place, but it's not empty. It's where discovery begins, and Newton lived there. In that loneliness, in that curiosity, in that space between what is known and what might be. So, when he stared into the fire, or crushed minerals, or measured planetary paths by candlelight, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to understand everything. And even though he didn't, he still gave us more than most ever will. Not because he had all the answers, but because he asked better questions. That's what science is, after all, not a pile of facts, but a practice of asking, a belief that the world is coherent, and that we, in our tiny, clumsy ways, might one day make sense of it. You breathe in that belief now, letting it steady your pulse. You're not an alchemist. You're not a physicist. You're not Newton, but you're part of the same journey. Still asking, still wondering, still lying here beneath a sky that obeys laws you didn't write, but that hold you all the same. And somewhere, deep in the fabric of those laws, is the soft shimmer of transformation, not instant, not magical, but real and quietly unfolding. You're still lying there, as if time itself has slowed to match your breath. The moon hasn't moved much, or maybe you just haven't noticed. It feels less like a clock tonight and more like a companion, quiet, watchful, part of the story, but never interrupting. Maybe that's how Newton saw the heavens, too. Not just machines turning in the sky, but faithful actors following an invisible script. And you begin to think about something else Newton gave us, something so fundamental. We almost forget it came from a person. Calculus. You hear the word and maybe think of chalkboards, exams, squiggly symbols in textbooks. But to Newton, it wasn't an academic hurdle. It was a language for the changing world, a way to describe not just where something is, but how fast it's getting there, how sharply it's turning, how suddenly it's stopping, a way to talk about motion without pretending time stands still. You wiggle your fingers just slightly, and even that small movement could be described in Newton's calculus. The speed of it, the curve of it, the way your muscles release tension as your hand falls back into the grass. Every little change has a story. Before calculus, the universe was a series of snapshots. You could measure where things were, but not the transitions in between, not the dance. Newton changed that. He gave us a way to measure change itself, acceleration, growth, decline, curvature, all of it. Some scientists still debate whether Newton invented calculus entirely on his own. Leibniz, working in Germany, was developing a similar system around the same time. Their feud became legendary. Accusations flew, letters were published, reputations were bruised. But you're not here to referee history's math fights. You're here to appreciate what it means to look at a falling object, not just as something moving, but as something obeying a law of change. Because calculus didn't just make physics possible, it changed how we see the world, how we model it, predict it, trust it, and yet it started with a need. Newton didn't create calculus because it was fashionable. He needed it to solve the problems no other tools could reach, to calculate planetary motion, to understand how forces acted over time. He built the tool not for the sake of theory, but to decode nature's handwriting. You take another breath, and it feels slightly different, not bigger or deeper, just aware, aware that even your lungs follow curves and rates, stretching, contracting, letting go. The very act of inhaling could be described with Newton's language of motion. And that's the beauty of it. Calculus isn't just for stars and rockets. It lives in everything that flows: blood, water, heat, light, sound, thought, yes, even thought. Because Newton's laws didn't end with rocks and planets. His ideas reached into how we think, how we model time, expectation, and reaction. They shaped the birth of psychology, engineering, even economics. His fingerprints are on fields he never lived to see. And what's more, he worked much of it out in isolation. The story goes that during the Great Plague of 1665, when Cambridge closed and everyone was sent home, Newton returned to his family estate, Woolsthorpe Manor, and there, alone, he had what would later be called his annus mirabilis, his year of wonders. He was just in his early 20s, no title, no fame, just a curious mind and a world on pause. It was in that solitude that he developed the basics of calculus, optics, and the laws of motion. Not in some royal lab, but in his garden, under trees, in notebooks, scribbling, staring, asking. You let that sink in, because maybe you've had moments like that, not of brilliance, but of unexpected clarity during strange times. When the world seemed still, and something inside you stirred. That's what Newton felt. Not just genius, but timing. Stillness wrapped around insight. The kind of quiet that lets you see. And in that quiet, he began to chart the movement of everything. Not just things that fell, but things that grew. Curves that arched upward. Populations, temperatures, risks, dreams. Calculus became the math of possibility, not just of what is, but of what might become. You look again at the sky, and suddenly everything there seems in motion, even if it's too slow for your eyes to catch. That's what Newton gave you, a way to know that stillness is rarely still, that behind every quiet point is a story of change in progress. And that's something you can carry with you. When life feels paused, when nothing seems to move, Newton would remind you, it is. You just might not be measuring it yet, because motion doesn't need to be fast to matter. Change doesn't need to be loud to be real. The slope of a curve, the angle of a fall, the edge of a question, all of it counts. And so, you close your eyes again, not to shut the world out, but to feel it more closely, to sense the quiet motion of your own body, the orbit of your thoughts, the arc of a day slipping gently into night. You don't need a formula for that, but if you wanted one, Newton left you the tools. He always believed the universe could be known, that even its deepest curves could be traced, not easily, not quickly, but patiently, persistently. And in that belief, there is comfort, because it means your place in the cosmos isn't a guess. It's part of the equation. You don't drift randomly. You move along a path, even when you can't quite see the line. And when you do rest, fully, finally, it won't be because the graph disappeared. It'll be because it reached its curve and flattened gently into stillness. There's something sacred in that curve, the way it softens as it levels, the way it promises not an end, but a pause. You lie still now, tracing the invisible arc of Newton's thoughts, as though your own breath were just another function tapering towards stillness. This isn't sleep. Not yet. It's the infinitesimal moment before, the place where change is still happening, but so gently, You can't tell if it's movement or memory. Newton would have understood that moment. He was obsessed with limits, not just philosophical ones, but mathematical, the edges of what we can know, the points we approach, but never quite touch. He called them fluxions, the early language of change, approaching zero, never quite becoming nothing. And in that idea, the limit was something profound. It said, you don't need to reach a destination to define it. You can get infinitely close, and that's enough. That's real. That's meaningful. The destination exists because it's approached, not because it's arrived at. You let that wash over you now, because maybe that's what you've been doing this whole time, not racing toward answers, but resting in the approach, not needing closure, just closeness. Newton saw the universe that way, a place where things converge, where motion becomes stillness, not through stopping, but through completing its arc. Even time, he thought, could be described this way. He imagined time as something absolute, flowing, unchanging, independent of the objects that move within it. But that idea didn't come easily. He worked for years to define it, to explain how time could be real, even if no one was watching it tick. Because to Newton, time wasn't just a measurement. It was a canvas, a dimension as real as space. You couldn't touch it, but you could see its effects, motion, decay, orbit, memory, and he believed it moved forward, always forward, like an arrow, a line that never curved back, not even for God. Some scientists still debate whether time is truly linear, whether it loops, whether it breaks, but Newton never flinched. In his cosmos, time was order, time was law. You think of that now, as your thoughts begin to slow, not because you're forgetting, but because you're reaching a limit, a soft, invisible boundary where waking thought gives way to dream. You don't resist it, you just watch it. The way Newton watched the heavens, not to control, but to understand. He believed in observation, careful, meticulous, relentless. He measured the fall of objects, the passage of light, the drift of tides, not because he distrusted the world, but because he trusted it enough to question it. And that's what you're doing, in your own quiet way. Questioning not with force, but with attention. Not to fix, but to notice. There's peace in that. There's peace in knowing that everything, absolutely everything, follows some kind of law. Even fatigue, even dreams, even the impulse to close your eyes and let go. Newton understood that impulse too. Not just to sleep, but to retreat, to withdraw. As he aged, he grew more reclusive, more defensive. He protected his ideas like a gatekeeper, wary of misinterpretation, wary of the messiness of public thought. But even then, he never stopped writing. His final years were filled with papers, corrections, refinements, not because he needed recognition, he already had it, but because he still believed the universe deserved more precision. You think of him, old and brittle, scribbling notes by candlelight, correcting tables of data no one else would read, not because he had to, because he couldn't help it. He once said, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, while the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. And that boy is still there, in you, in anyone who's ever looked up and wondered how everything holds together, who's ever stood at the edge of a question and thought, maybe, just maybe, there's a law for this too." So you breathe in the night air, and for a moment, it feels like everything has settled, Not stopped, just settled, like the sand in a shaken bottle, like the stars in their orbits, like your mind finally unwinding its last loops. This was never about Newton, really. It was about what he saw, and what he saw was this: that even in chaos, there's symmetry, that even in decay, there's predictability, that even in your slow drift towards sleep, there is structure. So, when you finally let your eyes close, and this time you really mean it, it's not because you've given up thinking, it's because you've trusted the thinking to rest. And that, perhaps, is Newton's quietest gift. You're still here, not fully awake, that's not fully gone, just resting in the quiet curve between thought and dream. It's soft here, dim, safe. The story has slowed to a whisper, and so has your mind. There's nothing left to figure out tonight. No more theories to prove, no more questions to hold tightly. They can float now, like dust in moonlight, suspended, weightless. You're lying still, and the world hasn't stopped moving. But that's okay. It turns gently now, without asking anything from you, like a lullaby written in gravity. The sky stays above you, stitched together by ancient forces, and your place beneath it is just right. Not too big, not too small, just here. Whatever shape your day took, it doesn't matter now, not in a heavy way, in a freeing one. The past has already fallen behind, step by quiet step, and tomorrow isn't here yet. All that exists is this softness, this breath, this moment. Let it hold you. The candle has gone out. The apple has fallen. The equations are at rest. You've followed the story all the way through, every orbit, every flicker of wonder, and now there's nothing left to do but sleep. Let the universe keep turning. You don't have to. Good night.